This is Anthony Pascal.
And this is Laurie Elster, and this is the All Access Star Trek podcast. We have quite an episode for you today because we are talking about the Star Trek Picard season and series finale called The Last Generation, and we also have a ton of news. We are going to try to move at warp speed, but I don't think we'll be able to because there's too much to discuss. So let's jump right in with the announcement of a Section 31 TV movie starring Michelle Yeoh.
God, who predicted that this is what they were going to do?
I wish you guys could see Tony because he was scratching his chin, pulling at his beard. I wonder. Yeah.
It
makes total sense to do it this way.
Something must have happened why they didn't announce this on First Contact Day, because apparently this has been planned since last summer. But for whatever reason, they finally decided they're announcing it. It's a pretty big deal. I mean, this is the first time that Star Trek's going to do a TV movie, what they're calling a original movie event, but it's streaming, so it's not a feature film, and it won't have a feature film budget. Although, in a way, it's kind of funny. It's a little reminiscent of the TOS movies. The first movie started off as it was going to be a show, then maybe a TV movie, then it became a feature film.
Yeah.
But then Star Trek 2 and the rest of those movies were actually run by the TV movie department, which is why Harve Bennett was the producer, but they just released them on the big screen, but they were budgeted and run like TV movies.
Didn't it switch partway, by the later movies had moved to the movie department, I think?
I think
so.
Eventually, certainly by 6, because Harve Bennett was no longer involved with 6.
The other big deal about this one is it's the first announced project for Michelle Yeoh since she won an Oscar.
Yeah, and the normal sites and reported on this, Entertainment and Trades and stuff, but you would see articles in the NBC News and CNN. It just got much wider exposure, I think, because she's at the top of the press release, Academy Award winner Michelle Yeoh.
Right.
They paid for that. They're going to make a big deal out of it.
I mean, I think that's the only reason this whole concept is still going and was still going is because of her. So if it was just a Section 31 show that they had been thinking about a few years ago, I don't think it would still be in the works.
Well, I've always said this was never the Section 31 thing. This was always the Michelle Yeoh thing. And they're just using Section 31 as an angle. It's described as Guardians of the Galaxy meets
Mission Impossible.
So, it's kind of a spy thriller with some winks and nods and fun. I'm looking forward to it. I think this is a good move to do a TV movie. I was never into the idea of an ongoing series, but a mini series or a movie I think is cool.
Yeah, well, I do think the way to do it is a movie for sure. Beginning, middle, end, all within a couple hours.
Now, the official synopsis says that Emperor Philippa Georgiou joins a secret division of Starfleet tasked with protecting the United Federation of Planets and faces the sins of her past. So they aren't forgetting that she was the Terran Emperor.
Well, good. And she ate a lot of Kelpians.
Yes. Well, they are delicious. Production's supposed to start this year, late. So this could show up late next year, in 2024, I think.
Yeah, it depends, but it could. The writer is Craig Sweeney. I guess Bowie and Eric have been long gone from this project.
Yeah.
They're actually on Sweet Tooth, which I'm very excited about.
Mm-hmm.
And Tunde is directing.
I thought that Alex would want to do it because it's Michelle, but I think he's going to want to focus on the Academy show, so I bet he directs that pilot instead. So, we don't know much about plot. We don't know who else is going to show up, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many possibilities. Discovery, past and present.
The big one is Shazad, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, it could
Mary
be
Chieffo. Mary Chieffo could show up.
Well, we don't even know when it is. She disappeared into the past, the Guardian forever. Like the 32nd century was tearing her apart, but she could show up in any century, really, with her friends, her time traveling friends or whatever. Carl.
I was going to say, if she's pals with the Guardian, she can go wherever she wants. And so now they're saying that this is going to be the first of at least a few Star Trek movies streaming on Paramount Plus. So they're thinking about additional, obviously nothing in the works right now, but they're thinking of this as a big plan to do a made for streaming Star Trek movie every 2 years or so.
And the Hollywood Reporter called this the set, phase 2 of Star Trek. The question is, where do you fit the Academy show? Is that part of phase 2 or phase 1? But there is a bit of a changing here, because Discovery's ending, Picard is ending, Academy is starting, these movies are starting, Strange New Worlds is carrying over. So it's a bit of a transition, I guess.
And I think an experiment in a way too. This, like Short Treks was an experiment and filled a need. I think this is also fulfilling a need and testing the waters.
I guess the big question is, because Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks were just renewed, that carries them through to the end of 2024, essentially. So for 2025 and beyond, this is implying that the plan is to be making these movies every 2 year. How many original shows do they also want running concurrently, if any? Or are they going to shut them all down and just do movies every couple of years, which would be extreme? So, but I don't expect all 4 shows to survive past 2025. Let me put it that way.
Right.
But maybe,
We'll see. I mean, the landscape shifts. Things change. Streaming has changed in the middle of all of this. We went from having so many shows. I mean, it was a couple of years ago, I think Alex Kurtzman said, I think to me when I was interviewing him, they keep saying yes to everything. We can just keep making shows. So those days are over. Now there's a shift towards TV movies. We'll have to see what all of that brings.
Now, speaking of one of those original shows, with Picard wrapping up, Paramount Plus wanted to remind everyone that Strange New Worlds is next. That's coming in June with season 2. And so they finally released a trailer, the first trailer for season 2.
So there's a lot of crazy stuff in this trailer. We see Spock drinking with Klingons.
And when you say Klingons, you mean Klingons.
Yes. Like Klingons the way we expect Klingons to look broadly in Star Trek.
Almost entirely next-genified.
Yeah.
Both what they're wearing and what they look like. So we got a little bit of Klingons with hair in season 2 of Discovery, and then they just stopped showing Klingons because they didn't want to deal with it anymore.
I don't blame them. That was insane.
So now we're just back to, this is what Klingons look like. I would like to see some smooth-headed, Klingons, just to see, because that matches the TOS era, and they did kind of explain that in Enterprise.
Yeah.
So, not in the way they did it with the original series with white guys in makeup and beards, but...
No, you don't want that?
So anyway, so I cut you off. Continue.
Okay, we have Spock drinking with Klingons. We have what looks like, it's hard to tell because of the way they edited this. It could be trying to mislead us, but it looks like La'an and Kirk have some attraction.
I think that's definitely where they're going with that.
Which I can't even.
Because there was another scene with La'an and Kirk, clearly time travel, modern day Toronto, although they could say it's anywhere, right?
At a Roots store, no less, which is like a big Canadian store.
Yeah. And he had his, I guess, his Farragut badge on. But later we see him beaming onto the Enterprise with an Enterprise badge, or the standard Starfleet badge. It's confusing as to what badges mean now anyway. Maybe he's joining the crew later or something. Who knows?
I don't know. I mean, and there's some nice, look, here's what I loved about it. And then I have to tell you what I didn't. But what I think it looks adventurous, rollicking, fun, crazy, sci-fi stuff looks great. I enjoy most of the characters, and it looks like they all get something fun to do. That part I like. Lovely to see Carol Kane finally.
She didn't say anything.
No, but we did get to see her. I know, I can't wait for her to talk.
I thought we'd get like a funny line from her or something, or a notion of like her being acerbic, or what's her deal? We don't really know her deal yet.
Yeah, she looks nice in the trailer. She seems nice. Smiling, laughing. But for me, I gotta say I try not to get hung up on canon, but I've got some huge canon issues with this whole thing. And I still, as always, wish that they would just tell their own stories.
I think we saw a Gorn in there and some Gorn ships, so they're definitely back, but we kind of expected that. The most interesting thing about this is the tone. It's very light. It's fun. It's trying to show you Planet of the Week, because we've just been experiencing Picard, which is kind of like Star Trek feature films, and it's very heavy. And this is like, it's kind of reminding you, and here's this flavor of Star Trek. And it's a very different flavor of Star Trek.
Yeah. So that part of it is appealing to me. But there are so many other, again, the strengths of this show lean too heavily on the weaknesses. And the weaknesses to me are the dipping back into stuff. Show me all new things. Show me all new aliens and all new planets. I don't need history. This is a prequel.
But then again, this is also a trailer. So the trailer is going to hit some of those things. Now, one thing they didn't show, which kind of, is no surprise, is nothing in the trailer from the crossover episode. Even though it was mentioned specifically in the press release, you don't see Tawny, you don't see Jack,
Right.
you don't see anything animated. But I'm sure that'll come with the full, because this is specifically a teaser trailer. So a full trailer will probably come in May or June. And I wouldn't be surprised if they give us a little Lower Decks in there.
A little something, something. I was very intrigued by their music choice for the song because they chose the Postal Service, which is I don't think I would have ever connected that with Star Trek. And I'm a fan of, I'm a huge Death Cab for Cutie fan, and Ben Gibbard sings for both. And he also does the theme for Shrinking, if you've been watching that. I thought that was, that made me kind of happy. I mean, I think it's sometimes weird to put a song in, but then it was a song that I liked, so I liked it.
But I think it fit again, it's all the tone and the mood they're trying to set.
Yeah.
With this trailer. It's fun. I'm looking forward to season 2. I'm glad there's a little gap between Picard and this, because it is so different that, we'll have some time to, pause and reflect and then look forward to a new flavor.
I'm looking forward to it, and I'm also apprehensive, so we'll see how it goes. And then the whole thing with, even though it was funny when Spock tried to come up with a catchphrase and said, I would like the ship to go now. One thing, and I never use the phrase new Trek, but new Trek is like obsessed with this Captain catchphrase idea. And they're all even Lower Decks did it. I mean, Warp Me is funny, but I don't understand because Picard was really the only one who had one.
And they really barely acknowledged it. I think they only acknowledged it in later seasons, but they never made as big of a deal out of it. And I think that's because the franchise is 50 whatever years old now, and these things start to grow into something almost mythological. And I think in this case, too much so. And we see it in this episode of Picard. So
yeah, it was all over Discovery. It's in Picard. It's in Lower Decks. And here it is again. But I did like Spock's the best, though.
Well, it's logical. One little piece of Strange New Worlds news. It's coming on June 15th. So 1 month ahead, they're going to release the first season of Strange New Worlds for free on Pluto.
Very smart.
The whole first season. Actually, this is part of a larger program where Paramount Plus is doing this with a lot of shows. And they actually, without announcing it, already did this with Picard. So Picard season 2 is available for free now on Pluto, including on demand. It's ad supported, but I think this might be a new thing, and I think it'll be for like a limited time, so I think Picard is going to disappear and then Strange New Worlds will show up.
And then, we might see the other shows pop up there too. Makes sense.
Ahead of 1 month ahead of their seasons.
Yeah.
Expect Lower Decks, the latest season of Lower Decks to show up before the next season of Lower Decks, maybe. That kind of thing.
They should totally get Lower Decks up there just because I think if you have Star Trek, there are probably a lot of Star Trek fans watching their 90s Trek on Pluto. And if they just saw parts of Lower Decks, I think they would love it. And maybe they don't know about it.
Yeah, Paramount Plus is not the biggest streaming service in the country yet. And so there's a lot of people who have yet to even see it.
Right. They go, oh, it's that cartoon, whatever. And I think if they actually started seeing it, they would see that it is very funny, but also still very Star Trek.
Speaking of very funny and also kind of Star Trek.
I just gave you the best segue I've ever delivered to anybody.
Galaxy Quest, which is considered the third best Star Trek movie by many people, came out in 1999. So it's been over 20 years There's been talk about a sequel, doing a TV show. It almost happened, and then Alan Rickman died. That was going to be on Amazon. Now Paramount Plus is developing a TV show. It sounds like it's in the very early development, so there's really no one involved except for the original producer, who's makes a lot of good shows for AMC, actually, but there's no creatives involved yet and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no information on how it would tie into the movie, or would we see any of the people. I mean, I'll be honest, I saw it once a long time ago and I don't really remember it.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it's great. I love it. It's on Paramount Plus. Just watch it, again, and remind yourself. It honors the fandom and the franchise in a great way. I'm a huge fan, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do. I mean, it's a huge challenge. I really have no idea how to turn it into a TV show. Do they reboot it? Do they pick up 20 years later? Or, who of the original cast would be involved, if anybody? So, it's a challenge. And this is early. Paramount's not officially confirming this. So this may never happen. But it's kind of weird that Paramount Plus is doing this, though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, they must be thinking in a Star Trek-y way, thinking of its connection. So, I mean, I read in one of our articles that that you wrote that Simon Pegg was even trying to work on some kind of a series or sequel or something a while back, and I don't know, that's who I'd call to be a writer.
Paul Scheer, who does voices for...
Yes.
He was in, lots of people have been attached to this project, and it never happened before. But let's see.
If they got the right writers, it could be funny, says the person who's basically unfamiliar with the movie.
It's funny. So when we put out our tweet on this, Terry Metalis quote tweeted us, and he said, "Put me in, coach." So he's putting his name out there to work on the show, and he's serious.
I think I saw Christopher Monfett, one of the other writers, chime in as well. Like, we all are the right people to do it. Saying, like, you have all the people. We're all right here.
I mean, Terry's great. Chris is great. But you're going to need someone like David A. Goodman and other people who know comedy.
Yeah. There are plenty of people who know comedy and Star Trek and Galaxy Quest.
Yeah, so if you pair it up, and Goodman and Terry are good friends. They worked on Enterprise together way back in the day.
Right. All right, so let's move into some Star Trek Picard news before we dive into our review.
There's some good news on ratings. I mean, well, there's not really ratings. Streaming services don't have ratings in the normal sense. But earlier this year, Nielsen started tracking Paramount Plus. So Paramount Plus grew enough for Nielsen to start adding them to their streaming rankings, which they only started a couple years ago. And Picard showed up in the top 10 last week, ranked at number 9. And this is only the second Paramount Plus show to ever show up in the rankings. The other one was 1923, which is the Harrison Ford
and Helen Mirren. Yeah, like that's that's a big deal.
It's kind of a big deal. I mean, it's not, we don't know if Strange New Worlds would have made the rankings last year. Maybe not, because Paramount Plus wasn't big enough for Nielsen to even care about at that point. Because that's the thing. It's not really apples and oranges, because when you're comparing ABC to NBC, everyone has ABC and NBC.
Right.
Whereas
when you're comparing Paramount Plus to Netflix and Disney Plus, you're in a different category.
Yeah. So The Mandalorian gets 3 times as many viewers as Picard, at least for the week. And this is because there's a delay. This is mid-season, essentially. So it might even grow.
Right.
But Disney has many, and Netflix have many more subscribers. But if you're Paramount Plus, just looking at your own network, that means that this show is doing well. Is the point.
Yes. And also, look, the show has broken into mainstream media in a huge way. All of these big outlets and websites are covering it. It's penetrated the market in a different way from the other shows. And they had I went to that thing in Times Square, by the way, with a big Enterprise flying in, and I went with a friend, with Anne-Marie from Seventh Rule, and there were a bunch of Star Trek fans there. And I got to say, like, for our big takeaway, besides how gorgeous it looked and what a nice job they did on it, was, like, Anne-Marie turned to me and she said, "Are Star Trek fans cool now? Like, We made it into Times Square, and that was the big feeling we had was like, we've been fringe nerds for so many years. And now the Enterprise D is in the middle of Times Square.
It's a little like 2009. I think if there was, Star Trek was on the cover of Newsweek, when the
Right.
Abrams movie came out. So I would say that was a bigger zeitgeist moment for Star Trek.
Sure.
And Star Trek had a couple big zeitgeist moments in the 90s. I think Generations but yeah, this is Star Trek's having a moment. I saw a tweet from Bill Prady, the guy who created The Big Bang Theory and a lot of other shows, talking about it on the web. Josh Gad has been talking about.
Yeah,
so you're seeing
Josh Gad's been going now. I mean, Bill Prady also wrote a Voyager episode.
Yeah, Josh Gad was a little more random. So
yeah, and very effusive.
Oh yeah, so people are noticing the show. I mean, it had the 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So today there's a website called Gold Derby, which is kind of a very inside baseball for Hollywood website that really just focuses on awards shows. And they wrote an article about how Picard deserves a best drama nomination for the Emmys.
Well, it does.
We should get on with the review. So just there's some stuff on the site you may want to check out. There's some great stuff all about how they built the Enterprise D, some great pictures from the Enterprise D. One key fact here is they built it from scratch. It's all brand new, except for the dedication plaque, which is original. So there's nothing fake. There was no AR wall. There was no green screen. The whole bridge was built meticulously.
And lovingly. Yeah. So there's the Ready Room also had like Mike Okuda took Will Wheaton on a set tour, and Variety had a big article with how they rebuilt the set with pictures. So there's a ton of information out there, and it's all well worth reading and watching.
So let's talk about The Last Generation, a nice title to bookend with The Next Generation, which was the first episode of the season.
Right.
The biggest double meaning here is it's the last generation of the Borg. I think that's what it's really meaning here.
Right. And I think possibly you're supposed to go into it thinking, is this the end for everybody? Which we know it isn't, but well, this ties into my whole feeling when I was watching it the first time, especially because you've got all this high stakes galaxy ending drama and intensity, and I'm sitting on my couch grinning ear to ear because we're on the Enterprise and everybody's back. So it was like such a weird dichotomy between what was happening and like I suddenly realized, oh my God, I'm smiling, and they're like, this is terrible, everybody's killing everybody, and I'm like, because I'm so happy to just see them all together.
So overall, as an episode, fantastic, great, loved it. Great episode, great season finale, good series finale. I think we're going to get into that as a separate issue. I mean, really, you need a box of tissues for this episode. It's so emotional.
Oh my God. On multiple viewings, still emotional. I mean, I was very torn. Like I was taking notes later, like on a third pass, and I was like, I don't want to criticize it because I'm so grateful for it, but I do have a list. But I did really enjoy it despite my list. And like I'm even contradicting myself at points, like just to jump to the end for a second, like it ends and I'm sitting there thinking, damn, I wish I could see like more of them happy. Like the main story ends and I think, I'd really like to see them all happy and hanging out the way that I wished at the end of Voyager we could have seen them reuniting with their families on Earth. And then they gave it to me. And then they gave it me like 3 different endings. But I got what I wanted. Like as I'm sitting there wishing for it, like obviously Terry also was like, yes, we all deserve to see them sitting around the poker table again.
Yeah, it ends multiple times. I mean, there's kind of the finale ending, the Borg threat story ending. Then there's a bit of a coda to that. Mm-hmm. Then there's 1 year later. And then there's the cherry on top of that, and
the credit scene, yeah.
And there's multiple endings all through that. But what's they're not really endings as much as bits of closure on different character arc journeys. Like the Rafi family thing and the Deanna and Riker thing. Mm-hmm. So once you get the idea of that rhythm, you're like, okay, we're going to get Seven's closure with Starfleet. We're going to get, everybody gets their thing. Everybody's arc gets wrapped up. But before we get into that, that's kind of a separate episode. There's like the episode, and then there's the extra bit to close things out. So let's focus on the episode, which is, this episode, it was very simple. Like the episode starts. Well, first of all, what's the first thing we hear in this episode?
Yeah, a little next gen action.
Right. You get
Yes.
the next gen credits without the credits, but just that nebula.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
with
yeah.
the voice.
From the president? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
It was, I think, a tribute to Anton, who played Chekhov in the movies.
Yelchin.
Yeah. Which I think is lovely.
You know, it was a surprise, right? Like, there's so many things that we kind of thought were coming or whatever, and this was something that was unexpected.
Yeah.
I liked how, because he's playing Chekhov's son, he just sounded like Walter. But then he switched to a little classic Chekhov Russian when he was quoting his father, which I thought was sweet.
Yeah, and he almost had, because I felt like it was at one point it was his father quoting Spock. Like, there are always possibilities sounded so Spock-like, and I thought he even took on a little bit of that.
So that was great, but it also set the stakes for the episode, which were, because that was a little Star Trek 4, don't approach Earth. Things are bad. Everything was very simple. Like, Earth is in danger. Because of the signal, we got to stop the signal. Where's the signal?
It's in Jupiter.
So, that's the plot of the episode. Stop the signal.
Right.
The Rafi and Seven Titan story. I mean, we knew it was going to be a little bit of that. And that was fun. I would have liked their story to have a clearer objective. I mean, they were like, well, let's just
fire at things.
Yeah. Like, but was it helping? Who knows?
Yeah,
Right?
I was very I did wish that their mission, that they had been able to do something that actually helped the Enterprise.
Right, that they were coordinating, that,
or somehow managed to slow something down that was coming after the Enterprise. They didn't really do anything useful except cause some problems, I guess. Distract.
Well, I think the implication is that they were slowing things down enough, because the whole point was eventually, I mean, and this was kind of ridiculous. You have all of Starfleet.
I know.
And you have one space station, right? And they had to go all the way to the museum and back, so they've been firing consistently at this thing for hours.
Yep.
How was it still functional? How wasn't it not vaporized within like 2 minutes? That's one hell of a space station.
Yeah, they made a good choice by putting that where they did.
And they rebuilt it at we're jumping ahead, but unless it didn't actually get destroyed, but it kind of looked like it was being destroyed. It looked just fine 1 year later. So
yeah, they fixed it.
They buffed. That just buffs right out.
Yeah.
Oh. Everything that happened on the Titan was cool, except you're like, is this just for fun? Is this just giving them some busy work? But it was still great. I mean, Seven, Jerry was fantastic.
She's so good. I liked the firing transporters at people. Like, that was fun.
It was the reverse of, we saw them firing transport inhibitors, Starfleet security.
Right.
So it was the kind of opposite of that. Although it did, this is because you want to create tension later. They locked them in the transporter room. It's like, did you really think they weren't going to get out? I mean, why didn't you gas them? Why did you not turn off the power in the transporter room? I mean, it's like a bunch of Borgified kids. They're going to get out.
But my favorite Seven moment on the Titan came at the end when Sydney breaks down and it feels terrible over what she's done. And Seven did a very Janeway-like thing and just took her into her arms like a mother, like put her hand on her head and was like, everything's okay. It's going to be okay. I cried during that. And I thought that was a beautiful moment for Seven and for these two friends, because we've established that these two have a real connection. And she was great. Ashley Sharp Chestnut is fantastic also.
And you could tell they remembered everything they did.
Yeah, they were horrified as soon as they were freed.
Yeah, that ship's going to need a counselor.
Every ship's going to need a counselor.
Yeah. I mean, I loved how she had this kind of ragtag group of middle-aged people, including the doctor who we haven't seen.
Dr. Oak finally came back. And one of them was James McKinnon.
Yeah, and the guy who was the cook.
Okay, so can we talk about him for just a second?
Okay.
Okay, one, why do they have a cook?
Right.
So that's one. And two, I liked his personality. Like, first of all, I was happy to hear that delis are still around in the 25th century. And I liked his personality of being the guy with excuses, but I wish his excuses had been more sci-fi, because he's like, my brother got a hernia. And I'm like, don't tell me they can't fix a hernia. Like, I wish if he'd come up with something that was a little more 25th century that had the same tone.
Right. He was like a character out of The Marvelous Miss Maisel, you know?
Yeah, like it took me out of it. That was my issue. It wasn't, it's not funny enough. It's that I suddenly wasn't there anymore because I was super aware of them trying to tell a joke with this guy. And he was fine, but I just think it could have been done better.
But what it did is it gave Seven her hero moment to rally the crew. We're all that's left of Starfleet.
The line must be drawn here.
He might have been an homage. There's a famous guy during Pearl Harbor who was a cook on one of the ships who manned one of the machine guns and shot down a bunch of planes during the attack. And he was just a lowly cook.
So maybe. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this whole episode that's reminiscent of movies and other things. So
let's move back to the Enterprise D, which is really where the action was happening, and the cube.
I just want to live on the Enterprise D.
Did you? I mean, I guess we just had Jonathan Frakes on last week, who said nobody dies.
I know, but I also wasn't. So I didn't believe him. I believed him when he said it, but as I was watching, this is how well told the story was. I realized Picard could totally die. And then at one point I thought, oh, Riker and Worf could die too. And so I did consider, even though I knew he'd said that, it worked well enough that I believed that they were in peril.
Yeah, whenever you have the "it's been an honor" speech, someone's going to die, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point of the "it's been an honor to serve with you" speech.
And his farewell to Riker, that Picard and Riker moment where he's like, it's meant so much, and his voice breaks, and Riker's like, I know that you know, and it's always been this. I was like, oh my God, it was just beautiful and emotional and powerful.
There were so many of those moments where you just had to stop. You had to pause because it was too much. It was overwhelming. Yeah,
like rich, beautiful, believable, powerful moments.
Which is really, I mean, because again, it was very straightforward. It's like, okay, well, we're going to go down to the cube to find the signal, and they kind of realize that Picard's going to have to split off to find Jack, and they all have their little adventure. I mean, what they did is everybody got their hero moment during all this, because they left some people on the ship, and Data wanted to go down with them, but they talked him into staying on the ship. But then he got to have his hero moment.
I loved his hero moment where he's like pleading in a very human, emotional way. Please trust me with this emotion in his voice. But we know he's still Data and that he can pull it off.
Right. Well, he's kind of surprised. He's like, it's a gut feeling, which is his first gut feeling ever.
Yep.
Right. He can't point to the Data, no pun intended. But what that also did is it gave the USS Enterprise, which is a character. I mean, one of the great things about bringing back the ship is you brought back all the characters, but it's a character too.
Yes, it has been since the original series.
So they gave it a moment, flying through the cube. Now, the comparisons are coming with the Return of the Jedi, right? Because it's...
Yeah, that was... Yeah, well, I was thinking of the original Star Wars movie when they're zooming through the cube and it felt like the Death Star. That's what it felt like to me.
Well, for us, like hardcore Star Wars fans, it's far more like the second attack on the Death Star because they go inside the Death Star. So Lando and Num Num, whatever, do their little run into the center of the Death Star with the glowing thing.
Right. It was very Star Wars-y for sure.
Yeah, it was great. And you got the little hero moment with Beverly.
I loved that. First of all, I was like, of course she knows how to do all, like she's doing, before she was even on tactical, she was doing these other things. And I was like, of course she's been running her own ship. She's been dealing with all this stuff. And then when she's running tactical and this beautiful moment. Again, very nice balance of light and very, very heavy. And they all turn around to look at her, and she's like, a lot's happened in 20 years. And I'm like, yes, Bev. Loved it. In fact, I thought everything she did in this episode was so well acted and not over the top in terms of the amount of emotion that you knew that character had. You could feel it, and it was contained, but boy, could you feel it.
Yeah, certainly the scene when they decided, both LeVar and Gates, in the scene where they realized if they blow up the beacon, it's going to blow up the cube, which is going to kill everyone on the cube. And they face the ultimate Star Trek question. I think someone says it's like,
Deanna spells it out in detail.
they die or everyone dies. Geordi looks to Beverly, the way he looks to Beverly, she doesn't say a word.
Yes.
But she's just losing it, but nods. And Geordi's, the way LeVar's voice cracks as he's talking to her and giving that order to, which she has to, because she has the fun moment of blowing up the turrets earlier, but then now she's the one who has to kill her own son. Possibly.
I know. And I was wondering if he was going to say, I'll do that for you. And then I was really glad he didn't, and that she had the strength to do this horrible thing. And you felt it. You just felt it.
I mean, there was a lot of these. Those were. I mean, there was a lot of great jokes where there's a setup and a joke. But
the threesome joke I loved.
Yeah. But these were also setups for emotional moments.
Yes.
And because later, when they weren't sure if they could beam them out, and they thought everyone was going to die, then Deanna gets her moment too, because she senses them.
Yeah, and she knows where they are, and she runs to the helm, which I loved. I thought that was beautiful and powerful. And I also thought when they first are heading out, when Picard is first heading out, and he and Beverly are, and he's like, I have to go, you have to stay. And they have that conversation. He says, you've taken him this far. Let me bring him home. And I thought, this is all the seasons of Picard to me that have the other two that have tried to say something about him that didn't quite jibe with me. This jibed with me. Picard being a father and having that add something to his life that was missing works.
He even forgave her for lying to him, saying everything you did was right.
He said everything you did was right. And I was thinking at that moment, I thought, I may still have some conflicted feelings about that, but if she's okay with it and he's okay with it, in the end she was right, who am I to complain? All of their communication, even that part where he goes into, the dead zone or whatever, and they're starting to break up and they're going, can you read? Even that was emotional. I thought everything between them was perfect. And I know I've complained about things earlier in the season where I felt like Bev wasn't given the gravity, the weight that she deserves. She was here. It was a beautiful episode for her.
Riker and Worf, obviously, they were the action heroes fighting their way through the cube, even though the cube is basically empty for reasons. And that was fun. And Worf had a phaser the whole time, but he prefers using his sword.
Because they're fun.
And that great moment when Riker says, I will, because they could have beamed them up, and he's like, no, I'm going to go to get Picard, but which was heroic. And Worf's like, oh, I thought we weren't going to die, which was kind of funny. But then they show up at the Queen's chamber, and there's nothing for them to do. And I wish that, because in the end, they were just able to beam them all up. There was really no point in them going at all. And they should have made it clearer or something where them going to that room somehow allowed them to beam them up. Like they turned off the dampeners, or they did something. Because there was no point. They showed up in the room and then they just watched. Because the ultimate hero moment of this was left for Jean-Luc Picard, who had a running dialogue with the Queen.
Yep.
Who let them onto the cube to begin with because she was gloating.
Yes, she wanted Locutus standing there in front of her.
Right, because they show up and they're like, the shields have dropped and the weapons have, like, it's an invitation because the Queen, this is
cocky.
Very cocky. Although she was not looking good.
No, I was going to say, not in good shape, yet still cocky.
Yeah. she talked about how things have been bad for the collective. Now, I think it's clear she's talking about, she said poisoned. It's since the Janeway thing, but she didn't
Right.
mention Janeway. She said it was you, implying it
I
was Picard, but it
I assumed
wasn't
she meant
him.
collective you, like you,
Certainly, but
yeah.
she should have. I mean, how many times have they mentioned Janeway this season? This is the one time that it made sense. She should have said that damn Admiral Janeway or whatever, because she's the one who poisoned them. But the sense we get is since then, it's just been bad news for the collective, and they can't assimilate anymore.
Right.
And until Jack showed up to be their new hope to assimilate via organic, thing that they described last episode.
And evolution versus assimilation.
Yeah, he was their last hope. Because I was saying last week, I hope that this is the end of the Borg. I think they could have been clearer, but I think that is certainly the intention, that she was the last queen. This is the last cube. This is the last generation. It's over. The Borg are done. Sure, some showrunner years from now could bring them back. Yes, they did mention them on Discovery, but maybe that's because they're kind of a galactic boogeyman.
Maybe they were talking about the Agnes ones.
Maybe. Sure. Yeah, because the Agnes, we assume they're still out there because they're
still out
nice.
there being nice.
They're friendly.
They're very nice.
They're hippie Borg. These are the bad Borg, and they're done. I think that's what they're saying. And Discovery, by the way, Discovery does tie into this because the transwarp conduits that are all over the galaxy are a mess, right? Remember the one episode of Discovery? Because the Borg aren't, the cleaning crew isn't there anymore. So it all fits. But I hope fans take away from this because they're like, oh God, not again with the Borg. But at least they're saying that's it for the Borg. Like, it makes sense. Picard ended the Borg. He said, after 35 years, I've had enough of these guys. It's over. But there was a lot. I mean, the Queen was very mustache twirly.
Yes, she was like, no.
But even before that, all her.
Yeah.
Because First Contact, the Queen was just so rich and interesting, and
yeah, this Queen was not, well, I mean, I kept trying to think, well, she's been on her own for a long time, and so she's not as interesting anymore. I mean, bigger picture, stepping back for a minute, it did make me think, looking at the series as a whole, that I wish if we had gotten to this, if Jack had gone over there sooner and it wasn't all saved for the last two, we could have had some nice exploration of the relationship between the changelings and the Borg in sort of a more interesting, less exposition-y way, and Jack's attraction to the Borg, because he really just kind of went over there and they got him.
Yeah.
I would have liked to dig into that because they planted some of the seeds, right? Like, they were there, but they really could have dug into so that we could have felt with him why this was such a relief to him after so long, as opposed to feeling like, oh, he just got sucked in and absorbed and that was it. So it just could have been, it's not that it didn't exist, it's that we could have spent more time exploring some of those very interesting things if it hadn't happened at the last minute.
Yeah, this gets back to the Borg reveal should have been in episode 8.
Yes.
We should have seen the changelings and the Borg working together, more of Jack. Yeah, I agree with all of that. It would have been, I mean, maybe Riker and Worf could have fought some changelings off, to show them working with the Borg on the cube, because I think some people are still confused, like, well, who was that face guy? That face guy was the Queen. But we never really saw that. We should have seen her doing that. Because the biggest hero moment was essentially Picard, where he sacrificed himself. He plugs himself into the collective to talk to Jack, because
even though he vowed he never would. So I thought that was another thing. We all know what a big deal that is, but I would have even put in a little bit of that before he went, where he was like anything but that. And then he has to go do that one thing that's actually his biggest fear.
Yes.
So I would have built that. Again, it was there. I would have built it up a little more. But when he said, I think the biggest turning point was, then I will stay with you. And he said it with Patrick Stewart's such a good actor. He said it with such love in his voice, beauty and love in the middle of devastation and fear and terror. And that's such a nice Star Trek message too.
And you could see why Jack was attracted to the Borg, and the way he was talking about the Borg,
Yeah.
they bring peace, and because this, the Seven used to talk about that, about I mean, yeah, the Borg are horrible, but there also is an element of a feeling of being connected and perfection and all of that. I mean,
Yeah.
remember there were those Borg who were unborged, but they wanted to rejoin, because they missed that,
Right.
and Seven missed the perfection of the Borg, and he was certainly drawn to that.
He called it joyful. He said there are so many voices welcoming me. Nothing's broken there. There's no suffering or loneliness or fear. Like it's this feeling he's never had, even, gallivanting around the galaxy with Beverly trying to help the downtrodden.
I mean, he was obviously being manipulated. I mean, people were dying.
Yes.
He's not a big fan of that, because the one person who really doesn't get to do anything in this episode really is Jack. Jack is essentially a slave to the Borg. Picard talks him out of it, so he has when Jack, he remembers the good old days and he unplugs himself.
It was very, did you ever read A Wrinkle in Time as a kid?
Yeah.
It was actually a little bit like that, like the end of that, where the brother is connected to it, which is the thing that is a collective, and it makes
Yeah.
everybody the same. And the way that Meg rescues him is she says, "I love you," and it's the same. I just realized this minute that it's the same ending.
But they blew up the transmitter. What
The
it was called
beacon.
again?
They blew up the beacon, and then
So it didn't matter if Jack
didn't
plugged
make
himself in or not. Oh yeah, that was the other weird thing.
Yeah, they blew up the beacon, but then the signal still didn't stop.
Which was, we were told at the beginning of the episode, it's all about the beacon. The president talked about the signal, and
Yeah.
they stopped the signal, and the Borg were still making their way to the bridge. I mean, I'm not sure it really made any sense, because it seems like a dumb situation where you assimilate people and you need to constantly broadcast to them, because back in the old days of the Borg had autonomy. You didn't need to constantly broadcast. They could function on their own. If they were cut off from the collective, they would still stick with their programming and all.
Right.
But yeah, that was a little weird, because they blew up the beacon. Jack unplugged himself, but they still were acting like Borg. So I guess they were just wrong that these. But then why did blowing up the
Yeah.
cube make it the difference?
That's not a good story point that they were just wrong. So, I mean, right. So it almost felt like they should have saved that scene they should have put the scene in earlier instead of after for reasons they didn't want to. But I agree. I was confused because I was like, why are they still bad? I don't understand. They blew up the beacon. It's gone.
Now, Jack's Borg outfit was pretty cool, though, I thought.
Oh, no, he looked great.
He looked great. It was like a mix of the Locutus and outfit and the lore.
Yes.
When lore was being,
like in Descent.
Yeah, with a little Star Wars Dark Trooper mixed in there.
Yeah, it's like you got to make him evil, so got to have some black stuff on him there. Yeah, Jack looked great, but I would have liked to have seen more of Jack's struggle. Yeah, but Picard saved him, and it was nice. It made me so happy. It was very earned.
So they're in this chamber, and they look up and they see the Enterprise D. So are they in the vacuum of space?
Yeah, I know. But I have to say, there are things that I'll stop and I'll go, that doesn't make any sense, and I get mad. I don't like that. And then there are things like that where I go, I don't care. It was great.
Yeah.
And every time I saw the D, I was happy. So all my little voices got very quiet.
I'm wondering if there was importance, because the Queen, when she realizes things are going badly, said, even if you somehow escape, you'll always be damaged. I don't know if that's just, for possible Jack issues in the future, or just to set up him saying, I'm not alone. I'll never be alone because I've got my pops and my mom and all my new pals.
But I assume everybody's like Picard remained damaged after his experience, and everybody is going to be damaged because all of these people, Seven is damaged. So all of these new ex-Borgs, which is now everybody under a certain age who's in Starfleet is going to be damaged and have to deal with some stuff. But it's Data who's in therapy.
Extended.
Yes, very long therapy sessions.
Yeah, so, Q blows up. There's a little delay action there, but then all the Borg stop being Borg of the Titan and everything's fine. Problem solved. Episode's over. I mean, how far? I mean, that happens fairly early on.
It does. It really does.
They wanted to give themselves a moment to have kind of this bonus episode because the runtime, I think it's the longest of the season, but
I think significantly longer than any of the other episodes.
There's quite a lot of episode after that. I remember looking at the runtime and seeing how much more there was after the cube blew up. And I thought, oh no, are we going to get, is this going to be the monster movie where there's another queen or, there's another cube?
I didn't look at the time I looked at the time before I started and I was like, ooh, this is a long one. Okay, cool. But then once we're going, all that stuff at the end was because it's the series finale. And it's really because I can't think of any other description except that it's Terry's love of Star Trek that we all share.
They could have wrapped it up in 5 minutes and they said, no, let's do it in 25 minutes.
Yeah, and let's give people, since this is it and this is the end, we don't know if there's going to be a legacy series, although it's certainly set up. Let's give everybody this wonderful gift, which it was.
So let's talk about everybody's little ending. So let's start, so Seven got her scene with Tuvok, and Tuvok was a stand-in for all the Starfleet officers who were taken over by the changelings to imply they were somehow rescued. I mean, you were imagining we were going to see like a rescue mission or something, but
I know, I really just wanted a room with some familiar faces in it.
I think, here's my theory on Tuvok's scene. Listen to the dialogue. The dialogue is written for someone of a higher rank. Tuvok's a captain. They should have made him an admiral. But listen,
I thought he was, and I thought he was. I guess
no,
not.
He's just a captain. Because when he comes in, they lead up to Tuvok by saying, changelings kept but did not kill many targets from the lowest ranks to the very highest. The very highest. And then they cut to Tuvok. Now, who's a captain. And then Tuvok does the exposition of telling Seven and, that their Starfleet's made the following decisions. But he's just a captain again. So it sounded like dialogue that should have been given by an admiral. I think that scene was written for Admiral Janeway.
Yeah, that would make sense.
I mean, Tim was great. It was great to see them together.
Terrific. Yeah.
I think it would have been amazing to see Kate. I think from her point of view, I mean, I guess if you're to do it, she would have then been in episode 7 as well.
Right. Well, they could have been the two of them together.
Sure.
She could have been there with Tuvok. But then you would have, I actually think, let's be fair, if you were going to do that with Janeway, you would need a longer scene. You'd need much more than what we got.
Or you'd need more for an episode 7 So no, it was like, look, because they were going through everybody. Here's your closure. But 7's, should I be, because her first thing is, I'm not sure this Starfleet thing is really for me. You forced me into it, you and Janeway.
Yes.
You remember?
Oh, I remember.
Yeah. So this gave her closure via another special guest star.
Shaw?
Dead Shaw.
Yeah, so here's my overall I really liked that scene and I liked that recording of his. And I liked him explaining that he's like, a relic, he called himself. Like he's an old school guy. And I thought it was really well done. And I love him. That said, go back to the beginning. We have Seven wrestling with being in Starfleet. And her whole arc is solved basically exclusively by Shaw twice. So she doesn't ever really resolve it. Like it is resolved. First he says, you're the captain, and he calls her Seven. And then we see this other thing. And it was a journey that in a way she didn't get to take. Even though I liked those scenes.
What it was is saying he validated her because she was feeling like she didn't fit into Starfleet. And he's saying, actually, you do because of what you've done. The problem is we didn't get to see enough of her doing things.
You are rephrasing exactly what I mean, we're agreeing. It's the same.
Yeah,
that's
but
point.
I still loved Shaw and the Shaw and Seven moment. I still love seeing him here. It just, we should have seen more of her as well.
Yes.
And this episode there was plenty of Seven in this episode,
Yes.
kicking ass and doing cool things.
I liked all her other stuff, but that's just sort of a broad note of how I felt about that. It would have been, and not to take away from any of his scenes, which were all, he's fantastic. Todd Stashwick is fantastic.
Then we get Rafi gets closure with her family.
Yes, that was such a nice thing that Worf did. I mean, it was a little too pat. Like at first I was worried that she was just going to go home and like remarry her husband and just be, a wife and a grandmother. And they're like, phew, okay, she's the first officer. We can discuss later the merits of having your ex as your first officer, but okay. But I love that Worf did that for her. After all that time of her with her conspiracy theories and everybody doubting her and thinking she was nuts, that was just a lovely thing for him to do. I thought their scene together was great. And that he went in for the hug was nice. I love her acting. I love the emotion in her voice and the way that she talked to him and her happiness knowing she's going to be back with them.
As we've said, she and Worf are the only two who really blended between the generations, as it were. But yeah, this is all, everything paid off well here for both of them. So
I'm still bummed she didn't get scenes with Picard because they do have a very specific history.
Yeah, she didn't really get much stuff to do this episode except stand next to Seven.
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't mean necessarily in this episode, but somewhere across the season.
Now, Data's arc, I thought, was interesting in that he doesn't have closure. In fact, it's almost the opposite. He's kind of freaking out over being kind of human.
He's starting a whole new story.
The issue is Data died in season 1 again. He had a lot of closure. The whole point of the season was a redo of Nemesis. And so one of the issues with bringing Data back, which they tried to deal with earlier, is he said like, oh, that was a different guy and I'm this guy.
It's fine.
But what I liked about this is like this whole new being kind of human thing is a big deal. And it's a whole new journey for me.
Agreed.
And it was funny.
Yep.
There was a lot of Deanna looking through her
vacation options.
Yeah. So
should we go to Orlando? That was but yes, no, I thought she was, bored, which normally I would say, oh, a therapist shouldn't be doing that. And then I go, oh no, if they're always running an hour over, then she's allowed. Then I can forgive her looking through her pad and distracting herself with other things. And I love that Riker was just waiting outside. Like I keep thinking, how long was he? He was probably there for the whole hour.
Yeah. Then we got into the thing with a scene that you could easily see someone saying, why do we need this? Just cut this for time, which is they said goodbye to the Enterprise D.
But in that section, they were not just talking about their characters. I mean, I'm sure you got this, but they weren't just talking about their characters in the story. They were talking about themselves as people and as actors who are part of Star Trek.
This was a very meta conversation.
Yes.
Talking about the past and, and all that.
They said it's difficult to imagine what we all might have been without her. And then Riker says, different certainly, but certainly not better. And that's them talking to each other too, and to us. And sometimes those things don't work. In this case, I thought it worked beautifully. And then Riker on the way out saying, I miss that voice when they hear Majel.
Yes. I get what I'm saying is if they did the 5-minute wrap up versus the 25-minute wrap up, this would have been the kind of thing that would be cut. This is one of the reasons why they gave themselves the extra time to say goodbye and wrap up different moments. And then we had the whole say goodbye to Jack and the setting up the legacy show thing, which was very blatant.
You
the way they set that up. Well, okay, but before we get there, so the whole like fake out with Picard of, oh, what ship are you going to go on? Oh, it's the Titan. Well, not exactly. What did you think of that?
So one, I thought that I didn't need it to be named Enterprise. I just didn't. We had our Enterprise, and I think moving on is moving on. And I think so. For a minute I thought it was going to be called the Picard, but he's still alive, so that's sort of, I guess you don't do that.
But you know what? Admiral Janeway gave special dispensation. You're the first person who is still alive who got a ship named after him. The show is called Star Trek Picard. Here's the only reason they didn't do that, because that makes total sense for closure, is that they were setting up the next show, and it works better if the next show is set on the Enterprise.
But the part I didn't like was, I think, like, Jack needs to, they're talking about like nepotism. I'm a Nepo baby, and those and names and all that. But I want Jack to forge his own path, which he can't do if he's on a ship that's named for his parents' ship. So to me, it took away from that a little rather than moving forward. And also, by the way, what is his job? That he didn't
Right.
know what it was before he got there, and then he gets there and he's like, what is he?
He's Naomi Wildman, right? He's the
The
captain's.
captain's assistant?
She said special counsel to the captain. You get to, but he's not like the counselor. I think here's why they did that is
After 1 year, by the way, like the
yeah. So somehow he's in Starfleet. Fine. We kind of
accelerate. They said
yeah.
accelerate program, blah, blah, blah.
Now I thought that he was a qualified doctor. Yeah.
Oh.
But they're just gonna forget all that.
I always thought of him as more of a medic than a doctor.
Maybe, but if he had a year later, they could have called him a doctor, right?
Sure.
They were doing a lot of things to set up the new show. They used the word legacy. They wanted him on the bridge because the bridge is where the action is. In your conversation with John Billingsley, said, some weeks I wasn't even there because it was all on the bridge and I'm never on the bridge. So the doctor character gets to do doctor things, and they put him in a red uniform.
Science officer is what I would have done with them. Didn't they
Maybe.
lose their science officer?
Very good point. So put him in blue. I think because they want him as a little Kirk-like character. So they want him in command because, in 10 years or 15 years, he's going to be a captain. So they wanted to put him on that path. So they put him in red. I think it's a little too clever, but whatever. I mean, we're now in the extra innings of this episode.
Very much so.
The extra innings. Again, the making way too much about is Seven going to say engage or God, like, could you just, I'm glad they didn't have her say anything at least.
I want to say again, stop trying to make catchphrases happen. Like it's like that line from Mean Girls, but just stop it.
To your point about having an X on the ship, I think it makes sense that they are broken up because you couldn't have them be together, first officer and captain. But this finale basically forgot two big things. One, that they were, together, and really the whole season did. What's the other thing that you think I'm thinking of that they just basically said we're going to pretend this never happened?
That Q died?
Okay, well, we're going to get to that. No, well, you brought it up last week. Laris.
Yeah, they forgot about Laris.
Like, because in the end, like Laris said, I'm going to keep a table open for you.
She's just sitting there by herself.
The loneliest.
We don't even know if she's
Romulan.
okay.
Right. Because they they didn't say it, but basically they kind of made it look like they're a family again and they're all together, and Beverly's an admiral now in Starfleet.
Head of Starfleet Medical.
Yeah, I assume John Lucas retired. Was he wearing his uniform pin?
But they called them both admirals. So, yeah.
I think he should be retired. Even if Beverly's back in Starfleet.
He should be retired. Well, so they left out Laris, but also another big thing that they needed to do at the end that they didn't do was I felt like there was no true acknowledgement of the devastation that had happened. Like they said, we're making friends, old and young, but they didn't take a moment to talk about all the people who died.
I mean, the way they did it was Riker said Captain's Log years 1, right? To say that it's a whole new era. And I agree. They could have shown a memorial, President Chekhov, We
don't even know if he's okay. Did he get out of the bunker? We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. He's
still in the bunker because nobody told him.
What's funny is Guinan was in this episode in quotes. Guinan's giving us the side eye. I'm like, okay.
Do you know what would have made more sense? Guinan left us the keys.
Yeah, because don't say she's there.
Then we don't see her. Like, if they couldn't afford her, which I get, because she's not cheap.
Or she's busy or whatever.
Whatever she's doing, she couldn't do it. It would have been lovely to have seen her, frankly. I would have loved it.
Yeah.
But if they couldn't get her, then just say, "Oh, she gave us the keys. It's a good thing that Picard's always had his own set of something that explained."
But short of that, lovely. Again, that was a
Lovely.
very long scene, and they got rid of the end credits to give you an even extended version with the poker game, which was great. And there, there's all
You
sorts of references in there and
you
stuff.
know what was very unique about that scene too? That was very un-Star Trek, and I loved it. Lots of overlapping dialogue.
Yeah, very on Star Trek,
I
very human
really
and
liked
normal.
it. Yes, I
Yeah,
really liked it. And it was telling us, I thought it had so many messages built into that simple choice. Like, they're all good friends. This is our farewell. They're not, there was a lot going on, and it was a beautifully done scene.
and they were also kind of true to their actors.
Yes.
Marina and Jonathan were off to have fun and vacation. Worf was
Worf
being
was going to talk
serious.
about Mugatu meditation,
Data,
whatever
Brent
that.
Spiner was trying to tell a joke, his famous joke
A
from
famous one that he was trying to finish from The Naked Now.
yeah, and Patrick Stewart was quoting Shakespeare. They
Yeah.
were all being themselves essentially. No, it was lovely and wonderful, and the spinning shot from above was the
Yeah.
same.
Tribute and yeah.
It went on for too long, and that was great. You
Yeah,
know what I
that is
mean?
I would exactly. That is exactly. And it's as I was saying at the beginning, it is how I felt where I thought I just want to see them happy, but I know the show's over. And then I get all these scenes of them happy. And I didn't it could have gone on for another hour and I would have happily sat and watched it.
And then we got the mid-credit bonus scene.
That's the one I could have done without. So for there are two reasons. One, again, it just blows away. I didn't look, we all know I didn't like season 2. But it completely blows away the whole thing in season 2 of Q ending his existence, and that was important and mattered. It is now not important and doesn't matter. And we already saw so much of Q last season that for me, I would have loved to have seen someone from Deep Space Nine. To me, that was like throw in Garrick or somebody where Jack is on a mission or doing something or has to deal with somebody and it's someone from Deep Space Nine. That would have been more fun. And it also puts Jack in the position of not having his own story because now he's got Jean-Luc's story gonna happen to him. So now he's back on the Enterprise and Q. That's not a new story. We've seen that story, and I want Jack to have his own story.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Here's the thing. Like, if you watch this, let's just pretend you don't read TrekMovie.com every day, even though you should. You just watch this season and you watch this finale. What are you assuming?
Oh, I'm totally assuming there's another show starting up right after this one.
Yeah. Yeah. With those, with starring Jerry Ryan, Ed Spaliers, blah, blah, blah.
Ashley Sharp Chestnut.
Yeah. And John Delancey's going to pop in every once in a while as crazy Uncle Q. Along with Riker and Worf and the rest of the gang. And there's no way you can't watch this without thinking Paramount has decided to do that.
Right.
They have not.
Right.
Terry Matalas has made it very clear there is no work happening on a legacy show.
Right.
He wants to do one. As we were talking during the news segment, there's really no money for it, and it doesn't really fit with their new phase 2 unless they do a legacy TV movie in maybe 2026. But it's not part of their plan, but they could make it part of their plan, I guess.
I mean, part of the problem is the length of the development cycle and how, I mean, the things they've announced have been in the works for a very, very long time. And they were like the Starfleet Academy show and Section 31. And they've been in the works for a long time when there was a whole different way of thinking about all of this stuff.
Yeah.
I personally think there will be a shift and they will find a way to make room for something in some way, either to create a new show or to test the appetite for it.
Yeah, money is not infinite, and
No.
they would have to rebuild sets. I mean, you can't just do a TV movie on the USS Enterprise G. You'd have to do a serious commitment, I think.
Right.
Or they'd have to find other ways to save money,
But if you're trying to pick the winner that you think is going to get you, that's going to make you the most money and get you the most attention, that's where you'd put your money.
So we'll see. But people are going to be expecting it now. That's the thing. Like when you watch a Marvel show, this is how they do it. When they put something in the mid credits, they are setting up the next movie or TV show. That's the kind of formula.
Yes, that's what we're used to.
So obviously Paramount Plus let him, so they didn't stop Terry from putting this stuff in, but at the same time, they didn't, this isn't part of a plan. This is all just kind of there.
Well, I'm glad they gave Terry the freedom that he's had in so many ways.
Oh, yeah. This is rightly or wrongly, when you give someone a vision, and you let them execute their vision, that's kind of what I think makes this season work, is they trusted him and it worked.
Mm-hmm. You didn't feel the hand of a committee and executives in there changing things. And you can often feel that in many of the other Star Trek shows, but this feels different.
In a way, you felt that on season 2 because of the pandemic and stuff like that. They had to change plans, and that's why they ended up in LA for so long. And whereas this season, they were kind of given a free hand, and boy, they ran with it. I still say it's the best season of modern Star Trek, certainly live action, if not all of it. It's one of the best seasons of Star Trek ever. People call it TNG season 8, though it's really like a trilogy of movies. You could probably cut this down to a great series of next gen movies that should have come after Nemesis.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I mean, when we talk about the season as a whole in a future episode of our podcast, like, I think we'll almost break the whole season down into 3 acts.
In general, certainly the best season finale of the show, and fantastic series finale, which is, DS9 series finale is perfect. So I don't want to compare this to that. And All Good Things, those are both.
All Good Things to me is, up until now, was my number 1 favorite finale.
I don't want to say this is better or worse, but it's just really satisfying. And
yeah, I'm not a big ranker. I don't always feel like I need to put things in order. But it was satisfying and exciting and emotional and rich and fun.
We've had less quibbles with this than most episodes, really.
I mean, I have all kinds of more little quibbles, but I don't even think they matter necessarily.
No.
Because I enjoyed it and I was happy.
Yeah, and you cried. I cried.
Oh, many times. I cried quite a few times. Yes. And upon repeat viewings.
Which is hard to do, especially if the repeat viewing is the next day where you remember everything.
And they're all safe. So that these goodbyes are not the goodbyes that you maybe thought they were before, and still it had the impact. But it's also these terrific actors playing these characters that they've lived with and known for a very long time. And beautiful writing. Just got to throw that in.
So well done to Terry and all of the writers and Dave Blass, and everyone really raised their game. And of course the actors. We'll have more to say about the season. We're hoping to get Terry to come on and talk about it all as well, because we've got a few weeks before June when we're going to start with Strange New Worlds. So this is not the last we're going to be talking about Picard season 3.
No, definitely not.
So the season's over, but All Access Star Trek is a weekly show, and we will continue to be filling the airwaves with discussions of Star Trek news and everything between Picard finale and the beginning of Strange New Worlds. We may take a week off somewhere in there, but we're planning to be back next week.
And forever. And forever. We will still be here. We will try to do interviews, new topics, interesting topics when there aren't episodes to review.
In fact, feel free to come to the site and suggest topics that we can cover on All Access Star Trek.
After you've reviewed us so positively on Apple.
Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.